In the heart of Dallas, Texas, nestled among manicured lawns, gated driveways, and sprawling mansions, lived Robert and Karen Whitmore. Their residence, a grand two-story Mediterranean-style estate in Highland Park, stood as a symbol of wealth and success. It was May of 2019, and the Whitmores were known among their elite circle for hosting extravagant dinner parties, charity galas, and summer gatherings by their private pool. From the outside, theirs was the picture of a perfect life. Luxury cars in the driveway, designer clothes in their walk-in closets, and vacations to Europe every summer. Robert Whitmore, a 52-year-old business magnate, had built his empire from the ground up. He was the owner of several construction and real estate development companies across Texas. His peers respected him for his sharp business mind and relentless work ethic. Robert was not just wealthy, he was influential. His name carried weight in political fundraisers, country club events, and investment circles. Yet, behind his firm handshake and commanding presence, Robert was also a private man who valued loyalty and discipline above all else. He believed in structure, whether in business or marriage. Karen, on the other hand, was 44 and very different from her husband. Where Robert was practical and grounded, Karen was vibrant and social. She had been raised in Houston in an upper-middle-class family, but marrying Robert had elevated her into a world she once only dreamed of. She adapted well to the role of a socialite, moving seamlessly through luncheons, fashion boutiques, and charity boards. With her polished blonde hair, flawless makeup, and toned figure, Karen appeared every bit the perfect trophy wife. Yet, those closest to her knew she carried a restlessness, a quiet dissatisfaction that her wealth and lifestyle could never truly fill. Their marriage had lasted for over 20 years. Together they had one daughter, Jessica, who was studying at the University of Southern California. With Jessica away at college, the Whitmore household was quieter, leaving Karen with long stretches of time to herself. Robert, often absorbed in his business affairs, left early in the morning and returned late at night. This gap in their daily lives created a distance between them, a chasm Karen increasingly filled with her social outings and fitness routines. The couple's home became a hub for gatherings. Their poolside patio, with its marble bar and cascading water features, was a favorite spot for friends and colleagues. Summer evenings in Highland Park often found the Whitmores entertaining, music drifting across the water, glasses of champagne in hand. Neighbors would smile and wave, remarking on how enviable their life seemed. But behind closed doors, arguments began to seep into their marriage. Robert's growing suspicion of Karen's late nights and Karen's resentment of Robert's controlling nature led to tension that their friends rarely noticed. By March of 2019, whispers of marital strain had begun. Robert confided in his younger brother that he no longer trusted Karen completely. Karen, meanwhile, sought validation elsewhere. She had hired a personal trainer at a private fitness studio in uptown Dallas, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. What began as professional workouts gradually turned into lingering conversations, then private dinners, and eventually something far more intimate. Karen found in him what she felt Robert no longer gave her: attention, passion, and freedom. Still, to the outside world, the Whitmores maintained appearances. They smiled at charity functions, traveled to Aspen in April, and hosted a lavish Cinco de Mayo pool party. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, a storm was quietly brewing. The community of Highland Park, where reputations mattered more than anything, had no idea what was unfolding inside the Whitmore estate. As May turned into June, Robert's suspicions grew sharper. He was not a man to ignore signs, and Karen's distracted demeanor, paired with her increasing secrecy, triggered alarms in his mind. The Whitmore's perfect life, carefully curated for decades, was beginning to fracture, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock not only their family but the entire elite community of Dallas. By the summer of 2019, the Whitmore's life was still the envy of Highland Park. On June 21st, the longest day of the year, the couple attended a black-tie fundraiser for the Dallas Children's Hospital. They arrived in style, Robert in a tailored navy suit, Karen in a sleek emerald green gown that shimmered under the ballroom lights. The couple looked every bit the power pair. Photographers snapped their pictures, and society pages later featured them as one of the most elegant couples of the night. Yet, behind the smiles and perfectly staged photos, Karen's mind was elsewhere. While Robert mingled with business associates, Karen excused herself to check her phone. Hidden in the stream of messages from friends and social groups were texts from Jason Miller, her 29-year-old personal trainer. Jason was athletic, charismatic, and ambitious, though not nearly as financially secure as the Whitmores. For Karen, he represented excitement, spontaneity, and a kind of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Their messages were short but filled with innuendo, plans, and a dangerous sense of secrecy. Karen had met Jason in February at Pulse Fitness, an upscale private gym in uptown Dallas. At first, it was about health and vanity, wanting to maintain her figure, to look as youthful as the women she socialized with. Jason pushed her hard during training sessions, but he also made her laugh. He complimented her when Robert had stopped noticing. By April, the sessions had turned into late-night drinks at trendy spots in Deep Ellum. By May, Karen was sneaking him into hotels under fake reservations. To outsiders, nothing seemed unusual. Robert's business trips and Karen's social schedule gave her plenty of cover. But Robert was a man who noticed details. In early June, while reviewing financial statements, he noticed several hotel charges under Karen's credit card. When he questioned her, Karen brushed it off as spa visits with friends. Robert didn't push further that night, but the seed of suspicion was planted. The introduction of Jason into Karen's life marked a turning point. Their affair was reckless, but Karen convinced herself she deserved happiness. She told herself Robert cared more about his empire than about her. In Jason, she found not only a lover but also an accomplice to her frustrations. Jason, meanwhile, enjoyed the thrill of being with a wealthy, glamorous woman. He was aware of the risks but blinded by the allure of money, gifts, and Karen's attention. By mid-June, Robert began checking Karen's phone whenever she left it unattended. On June 28, he found a string of messages between Karen and Jason that confirmed his worst fears. The texts weren't vague anymore, they were explicit, filled with details of meetings, feelings, and promises. One message from Jason read, "Soon it'll just be us. No more sneaking around." Robert's jaw tightened as he scrolled through, feeling the betrayal with every word. That night, Robert sat alone in his study, sipping bourbon and staring at his estate's pool through the window. He thought about the years he had invested in his marriage, the trust he had given Karen, and the empire he had built. For Robert, betrayal wasn't just about broken vows, it was about power, respect, and control. He resolved that the marriage was over. On July 2nd, Robert met with his attorney in downtown Dallas. The plan was straightforward: file for divorce and cut Karen off financially. Robert made it clear he wanted to protect his daughter Jessica's inheritance. His attorney assured him the evidence of infidelity would heavily favor him in court. Robert left that meeting with determination, ready to confront Karen after the 4th of July holiday. Meanwhile, Karen sensed Robert's distance but underestimated how much he already knew. On July 4th, they hosted their annual Independence Day pool party. Guests enjoyed barbecue, fireworks, and music. Karen, wearing a white sundress, floated from group to group, laughing and smiling, while Robert stayed mostly with his business associates. To the neighbors, nothing seemed amiss. But to Robert, the party was a performance he could hardly stomach. That night, after the last guest had left and the fireworks faded from the Dallas skyline, Robert told Karen that they needed to talk soon, seriously. His tone was clipped, his eyes cold. Karen's heart pounded. She suspected what was coming, but she tried to mask her anxiety with indifference. In the days that followed, Jason grew impatient. He wanted Karen to make a decision, to either commit fully to him or end things. Karen, trapped between fear of losing her lifestyle and fear of losing Jason, felt cornered. Every glance from Robert, every phone call from Jason, tightened the noose around her. By July 10th, the Whitmore home, once filled with laughter and luxury, had become a silent battlefield. The tension was thick, unspoken but undeniable. And as the summer heat bore down on Dallas, the foundation of the Whitmore's marriage was about to crack wide open, setting into motion the chain of events that would lead to tragedy by the shimmering blue water of their pool. The night of July 12, 2019, was unbearably hot in Dallas. The kind of night when the air itself felt heavy, thick with humidity clinging to the skin. At the Whitmore estate in Highland Park, the pool lights shimmered a soft turquoise glow across the water, casting long reflections on the marble patio. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of cicadas outside and the occasional splash of water from the pool's decorative fountains. Robert sat in his study that evening, sipping on his second glass of Woodford Reserve bourbon. He had spent most of the day reviewing final drafts of his divorce documents with his attorney. The evidence of Karen's infidelity was overwhelming, and Robert had made up his mind. Tomorrow morning, July 13th, he would tell Karen everything. The divorce was imminent, her access to the joint accounts would be severed, and Jessica's inheritance would be secured. But fate has a way of turning even the most carefully laid plans upside down. At 10:45 p.m., Karen entered the study. She was barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wearing a silk robe. "Are you still working?" she asked softly, though her tone carried more annoyance than concern. Robert glanced up, his expression hard. "No, just thinking." Karen lingered at the doorway, uncertain. She could sense the distance between them had grown too wide to bridge with small talk. Still she tried. "The pool looks beautiful tonight. Maybe we should sit outside for a while." Robert let out a slow breath. "We'll talk tomorrow, Karen. There are things we need to discuss." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air. Karen nodded stiffly and turned away, but her pulse quickened. She knew exactly what he meant. Robert was about to end everything. Minutes later, when Karen stepped outside onto the patio, Jason was already there. He had arrived earlier through the side gate, unnoticed by Robert. Karen had texted him earlier that evening, desperate for comfort, unsure of what to do. Jason leaned against the outdoor bar, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, his presence dangerously out of place in the luxurious setting. "You shouldn't be here," Karen whispered, glancing nervously back at the house. Jason shrugged. "You asked me to come. You said you needed me." Karen wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the shimmering pool. "Robert knows. He's going to cut me off. Everything. The house, the money, the accounts, gone. I'll have nothing." Jason stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Then maybe we don't give him the chance." Karen froze, turning to face him. "What do you mean?" Jason's eyes flicked toward the pool. "Accidents happen all the time. He drinks, doesn't he? Late at night, near the water." Her breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't process what Jason was suggesting. Murder. The thought terrified her, yet a dark part of her didn't immediately reject it. Her mind raced. If Robert divorced her, she would lose everything. But if Robert were gone, she would inherit, control, and finally live the life she wanted without answering to him. At 11:15 p.m., Robert stepped out of the study, intending to confront Karen sooner rather than later. He walked through the living room and out to the patio. The sight that met him was a blow to the gut. Karen and Jason standing close, whispering. "Jason," Robert's voice cut like ice. "What the hell are you doing here?" Karen's heart leapt into her throat. Jason straightened, but his jaw tightened, ready to defend himself. Robert's face flushed red with fury. "You bring him here? To my house. My home." Karen stammered, "Robert, please." But Robert wasn't listening. He stormed toward them, fists clenched. "You think I don't know? I've seen the messages, the hotel charges. You've been lying to me for months." Karen tried to step between them, but Robert shoved past her, his focus locked on Jason. "Get out," Robert growled, pointing toward the gate. "Get out before I drag you out." Jason, fueled by adrenaline and pride, didn't move. "Maybe you should calm down, old man," he said, his tone mocking. The words only pushed Robert further. He lunged at Jason, grabbing his shirt, and the two men struggled dangerously close to the pool's edge. Karen screamed, her hands clutching her head, frozen in panic. The fight was quick, chaotic. Robert had the strength of a man enraged, but Jason was younger, faster. In the scuffle, Robert slipped on the wet tiles, his body crashing into the water with a loud splash. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the bubbling of the water. Robert surfaced, gasping, but he was disoriented, weighed down by alcohol and rage. He thrashed, trying to pull himself toward the edge. Karen stood frozen, her heart pounding as Jason looked down at Robert struggling. "Help me," Robert shouted, his voice hoarse. But Jason didn't move. Instead, he pressed a hand firmly against Karen's shoulder. "This is your chance," he whispered. "Do nothing." Karen's mind spun in terror. She could end it right here, her husband, her problems, her fears. Or she could dive in, save him, and face the consequences Robert had promised. Seconds felt like hours as Robert's arms slapped against the water, his strength fading. At 11:24 p.m., Robert's movements slowed. His head dipped beneath the surface, resurfaced once, then slipped under again. The pool light glowed eerily as ripples spread outward, then stilled. Karen's breath came in shallow gasps, tears streaking her cheeks. Jason stepped back, his voice steady. "It's done. Say it was an accident. He was drunk, you tried to help, but it was too late. No one will ever know." But someone did know. Mounted discreetly above the patio bar, a security camera recorded everything. The fight, the fall, the struggle, the hesitation. It was all there, stored silently on the estate's surveillance system. Karen didn't notice the small red light blinking in the corner. She only stood there, staring at the water where her husband's body now floated motionless. The night air felt suffocating, and the luxury of the Whitmore estate suddenly felt like a prison. The inciting incident had been set. By morning, Robert Whitmore would be found dead in his own pool, and the story Karen planned to tell would be far different from the one the cameras had already captured. The morning of July 13, 2019, began with sirens. At 6:32 a.m., a frantic call to 911 was logged from the Whitmore residence on Beverly Drive. The dispatcher's recording captured Karen's trembling voice. "My husband, he's not breathing, he's in the pool. I tried to pull him out, but please send someone quickly." Within minutes, Dallas Fire Rescue arrived, followed closely by Highland Park Police. Officers and paramedics rushed to the backyard, where Robert Whitmore's lifeless body lay stretched out on the cool marble patio. Karen sat nearby, her silk robe damp, her mascara smudged, rocking back and forth as though in shock. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but Robert had been dead for several hours. One of the officers quietly confirmed the time of death as likely late last night. Detective Mark Ellison, a veteran with the Highland Park Police Department, was called to the scene at 7:15 a.m. A tall, methodical man in his late 40s, Ellison had worked countless high-profile cases involving Dallas's wealthy elite. He knew the Whitmore name carried influence, but influence didn't change the facts. When he arrived, Ellison carefully surveyed the scene. The morning sun glared off the pool water, making it difficult to look at the spot where Robert had drowned. Empty wine glasses rested on the patio table, one lipstick stained, one half full. A bottle of bourbon sat uncapped on the bar counter. At first glance, it resembled the aftermath of a late-night party gone wrong. Karen repeated her story between sobs. She told the officers that she and Robert had been drinking by the pool after midnight. Robert, intoxicated, had insisted on swimming despite her protests. She claimed she went inside briefly to fetch towels. When she returned, she found Robert floating face down in the water. She said she panicked, tried to pull him out, then called 911 after realizing he wasn't breathing. It sounded believable enough. Accidental drownings weren't uncommon, especially involving alcohol. Yet Ellison's instincts told him to tread carefully. By 9 a.m., Robert's body had been transported to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office. The initial observation noted bruising along his forearms and a small abrasion near his temple, injuries that could suggest a struggle. Toxicology reports would take days, but early notes mentioned alcohol in his system. Back at the Whitmore estate, crime scene technicians dusted for prints and secured the area. That was when Officer Jenkins, one of the patrolmen, noticed the small security camera mounted above the patio bar. The device was still powered on, its tiny red light blinking. "Detective," Jenkins called out, pointing upward. Ellison's eyes narrowed. "Get IT to pull the footage. Everything from last night." Karen was escorted inside for a more formal statement. She sat at the long dining room table, her hair damp, her eyes red but alert. Ellison studied her carefully, noting the way she twisted her hands together. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began calmly, "can you walk me through last night again, step by step?" Karen recounted the same version of events. A quiet night, too much drinking, a careless swim, tragedy. Her words trembled, but her tone carried a rehearsed rhythm, almost as if she had gone over the story in her head multiple times. "And you didn't see him fall in?" Ellison pressed. She shook her head quickly. "No. I had gone inside. When I came back it was too late." Ellison nodded but wrote something in his notebook. He didn't challenge her, yet. By noon, whispers had already begun spreading through the Highland Park community. A man of Robert's stature dead in his own pool was not a story that stayed quiet for long. Neighbors stood at their gates, watching as police cars and news vans lined the street. That evening, Jessica Whitmore, the couple's daughter, flew in from Los Angeles after receiving the devastating news. At only 21, she was stunned, unable to comprehend how her father, strong and disciplined, could die so suddenly. She embraced her mother, but even in her grief, she sensed something was off. Karen's tears felt forced, her hugs too brief. 2 days later, on July 15, Detective Ellison met with the forensic team. The security system had indeed captured the patio area between 10 p.m. and midnight. The footage was grainy but clear enough. At 11:15 p.m., Robert could be seen confronting Jason Miller, the younger man Ellison did not yet recognize. The camera captured the heated exchange, the shoving match, and Robert's fall into the pool. Most damning of all, it showed Karen standing frozen as Robert thrashed in the water, making no attempt to help him. Ellison replayed the video several times, his jaw tightening. This was no simple accident. The next morning, July 16th, Ellison called Karen back to the station under the pretense of clarifying her statement. He showed her still images from the footage. Karen's face drained of color when she saw Jason's figure on the screen. "Who is this man?" Ellison asked calmly. Karen stammered. He's just a trainer. A friend." "A friend?" Ellison repeated, his tone flat. "Interesting friend to have at your house at 11 o'clock at night while your husband ends up dead in the pool." Karen's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't convincing. Ellison knew she was hiding something, and now the investigation had shifted. What began as a possible accident was officially being treated as a suspicious death. The Dallas Morning News ran the headline on July 17th. "Dallas real estate mogul found dead in pool. Police investigating circumstances." The story of Robert Whitmore's death was no longer confined to the whispers of Highland Park. It was now front-page news. And for Detective Ellison, the case was only beginning to unravel. By the third week of July 2019, the case had already captured public attention across Dallas. Robert Whitmore's name carried weight in business and society circles, and his sudden death had triggered endless speculation. Initial reports framed it as a tragic accident after a night of drinking, but the whispers of suspicion grew louder when details of a possible struggle began to surface. Detective Mark Ellison kept the findings of the security footage close to his chest. He knew the case was delicate, not only because of the Whitmore family's reputation but also because of the pressure from city officials to handle it discreetly. Yet, the evidence told a story different from the one Karen had been repeating. The camera showed Robert confronting another man and falling into the pool during the altercation. Most unsettling was Karen's inaction as Robert struggled for his life. As forensic analysts examined Robert's body further, the results supported Ellison's suspicions. The bruises on Robert's arms were consistent with defensive movements, as though he had been grappling with someone. The abrasion on his temple aligned with impact against a hard surface, likely the edge of the pool during the struggle. The toxicology report confirmed alcohol in his system but not at a level high enough to fully impair his motor functions. This meant that while intoxicated, Robert was still capable of swimming under normal circumstances. His death was not simply the result of drunken carelessness. Meanwhile, financial investigators dug into Robert's recent actions and discovered the divorce proceedings already in motion. The paperwork, found in his study drawer, clearly indicated his intention to cut Karen off from joint accounts and secure his assets for Jessica. The timeline was damning. Robert had planned to confront Karen formally about the divorce just days before his death. The motive for foul play became increasingly clear. The presence of Jason Miller, Karen's personal trainer, complicated the picture further. His identity was quickly established after detectives cross-referenced Karen's gym memberships and personal appointments. Jason's background was far from spotless. Though never convicted, he had a record of minor altercations, including a bar fight in 2016 and a dismissed assault charge in 2017. Financially, he was unstable, living in a modest apartment in uptown Dallas, with no steady income apart from his training sessions. His sudden association with a wealthy socialite like Karen immediately raised red flags. Detectives pieced together the sequence of events leading up to Robert's death. Surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras and Karen's phone records revealed that Jason had been near the Whitmore estate several times in June and July, often late at night. This detail contradicted Karen's initial claim that Jason was merely a casual acquaintance. It was increasingly obvious that their relationship was more than professional. The twist emerged fully when investigators retrieved the complete surveillance footage from the Whitmore security system. While Karen had likely hoped the incident would be perceived as an accident, the camera had captured not just Robert's fall but also the telling moment afterward. As Robert fought to stay afloat, Karen stood motionless. Jason remained beside her, his posture steady, his movements calculated. Neither made an attempt to help Robert, even when it was clear he was drowning. The inaction spoke louder than any words. Forensic analysts enhanced the footage to provide a clearer view, and every frame painted the same damning picture. It was not the act of pushing or striking that sealed Robert's fate, but the deliberate choice to do nothing as he died. This detail shifted the case from a potential manslaughter to a question of premeditated intent. The twist deepened when financial records linked Karen and Jason more directly. Bank statements showed that Karen had transferred several $1,000s to Jason in recent months, disguised as payments for wellness services. Investigators suspected these were cover payments to support their affair. Moreover, a draft email found on Karen's laptop revealed discussions of selling property in the event of a settlement, suggesting she had already considered a future without Robert well before his death. As the evidence mounted, public perception began to change. Neighbors who once admired the Whitmores started to recall unusual details. Some remembered Karen hosting parties without Robert present, while others had noticed Jason's unfamiliar car parked discreetly near the estate. Gossip became fuel for the media, which now reported the case as a potential murder investigation rather than an accident. The turning point came when Ellison briefed his team on July 19. He concluded that the evidence pointed toward a coordinated effort between Karen and Jason. The confrontation may not have been planned for that exact night, but once the struggle broke out and Robert ended up in the pool, the decision to let him drown was intentional. This act transformed suspicion into a clear narrative of conspiracy. The twist was undeniable. The picture-perfect marriage of Robert and Karen Whitmore, once envied by the Dallas elite, was now exposed as a facade hiding betrayal, greed, and violence. Robert's death was not just a personal tragedy, it was the collapse of an entire image carefully built over decades. Detectives prepared to move forward, aware that the case had reached a critical turning point. What had begun as an apparent accident now stood on the verge of becoming a high-profile criminal trial, with Karen and Jason at the center of it all. By late July 2019, the investigation into Robert Whitmore's death had transformed from a quiet inquiry into a storm that shook the Highland Park community. Detectives were no longer considering whether Robert had drowned accidentally. The focus had shifted entirely to uncovering the level of involvement Karen and Jason had in what appeared to be a carefully concealed crime. The evidence continued to build layer by layer. Phone records revealed dozens of late-night calls and messages exchanged between Karen and Jason, many of them on the same nights Robert was away on business trips. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras placed Jason near the estate on multiple occasions, including nights when Karen claimed to be alone. Financial transfers from Karen's account to Jason, previously labeled as fitness payments, now looked more like bribes or secret support for their relationship. The medical examiner's full report arrived on July 22. It confirmed drowning as the cause of death but noted significant findings: defensive bruising on Robert's arms, consistent with attempts to fend off an attacker, and a head injury likely sustained during the altercation near the pool. The report also confirmed that while Robert had alcohol in his bloodstream, the level was not sufficient to incapacitate him completely. These details painted a clear picture. Robert had not simply stumbled into the water. He had been overpowered and then left to die. Detective Ellison presented the findings to his team, outlining how the couple's fractured marriage, Karen's extramarital affair, and the looming divorce all converged into motive. Robert's plan to cut Karen off financially left her with little incentive to stay loyal, while Jason stood to gain power and stability by removing Robert from the equation. Together they had both opportunity and reason. The conflict escalated further when Jessica Whitmore, grieving and determined, met with investigators. She admitted that her father had confided in her weeks earlier about his growing mistrust of Karen. He had hinted at discovering something that would end the marriage but had not gone into detail. Jessica also revealed that her father had recently changed his will to ensure she was the primary beneficiary. Karen, according to the revised document, would receive only limited spousal support if the divorce were finalized. This revelation added a chilling dimension to the motive. If Robert lived, Karen would lose everything. If Robert died before the divorce, she stood to inherit far more. By the last week of July, prosecutors were quietly preparing for possible charges. The district attorney's office reviewed the evidence and concluded that both Karen and Jason could be indicted, either for conspiracy to commit murder or for second-degree murder through deliberate negligence. The case was delicate. Convicting wealthy and socially connected defendants in Dallas had always been complicated, but the security footage gave prosecutors a powerful weapon. Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. News outlets reported daily updates, portraying Karen as a glamorous widow turned suspect and Jason as the reckless outsider who had infiltrated Dallas high society. Tabloids speculated about secret plots and financial motives, while more serious publications dissected the legal implications of the footage. Neighbors who once envied the Whitmore's lifestyle now treated Karen with suspicion. At charity events and private luncheons, her name was whispered like a warning. Internally, Karen struggled to maintain her composure. She continued to play the role of grieving widow, but cracks appeared in her facade. Friends noticed her sudden absences from social gatherings and her refusal to answer questions about Jason. Jason, on the other hand, grew restless and reckless. He avoided police questioning at first but eventually admitted to being present at the estate the night Robert died. His statement, however, conflicted with Karen's version of events, exposing fault lines in their alliance. The rising conflict reached its peak when investigators obtained the full backup of Karen's phone. Hidden among her deleted messages were incriminating exchanges with Jason in the days leading up to Robert's death. The texts revealed Karen's fear of losing her financial security and Jason's insistence that Robert was an obstacle they needed to remove. The most damning message, dated July 11th, read like an unintentional confession. Karen had written that Robert's threats to cut her off would end tomorrow one way or another. When Ellison reviewed these messages alongside the footage, the case against Karen and Jason became airtight. The deliberate inaction at the pool was no longer just negligence. It was a choice aligned with conversations they had already been having privately. The emotional weight of the case also grew heavier. Jessica, torn between grief and anger, began to distance herself from her mother. She moved temporarily to stay with her uncle, Robert's younger brother, and quietly provided prosecutors with copies of family emails that showed Robert's growing concern about Karen's behavior. The fracture within the family mirrored the fracture within the community, as people who once admired Karen now questioned her every move. By the end of July, the investigation had reached a boiling point. Prosecutors drafted formal indictments, the police prepared arrest warrants, and the story dominated the news cycle. The conflict was no longer confined to whispered suspicions or private evidence. It had become a public showdown, a battle between appearances and reality, between wealth and justice. What had started as the tragic drowning of a respected businessman had now escalated into a high-profile murder investigation, with Karen and Jason at the center of the storm. The world they had built on secrecy and indulgence was collapsing under the weight of evidence and exposure. The next step was inevitable, and both of them would soon face the consequences. On the morning of August 1, 2019, the investigation into Robert Whitmore's death reached its conclusion. After weeks of collecting evidence, reviewing footage, and piecing together financial motives, Highland Park police executed simultaneous arrests. Karen Whitmore was taken into custody at her home, still dressed in the quiet elegance she had tried to maintain despite the crumbling facade of her life. Jason Miller was picked up at his uptown apartment, where he had been living in nervous anticipation of the inevitable. The charges were formal and severe. Both were indicted for second-degree murder and conspiracy, based on the surveillance footage, the bruises identified on Robert's body, the toxicology results, and the incriminating phone records. For prosecutors, the case was strong. For the Dallas community, it was scandalous. The glamorous image of the Whitmore family had been shattered beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, the story dominated national headlines. Media outlets portrayed Karen as the archetype of a socialite driven by greed and desire, willing to sacrifice her husband's life to preserve her own comfort. Jason was painted as the reckless outsider, a younger man seduced by the promise of wealth and influence. The footage of Robert's final moments, though never publicly released, became the centerpiece of the legal proceedings, described in detail during preliminary hearings. The fallout extended beyond the courtroom. The Whitmore estate, once a symbol of prestige, became a landmark of scandal. Neighbors who once attended Karen's parties avoided the property, and the community of Highland Park treated the house as a reminder of betrayal and tragedy. The Whitmore business empire, once under Robert's control, shifted into the hands of trustees and family members determined to protect Jessica's inheritance. Jessica herself became a silent figure in the proceedings. She attended hearings but spoke little, her presence a quiet reminder of the true cost of the crime. She had lost her father to betrayal and her mother to the justice system, and nothing could restore the life she once knew. The revised will secured her future financially, but the emotional damage was far deeper. By late autumn, the trial dates were set. Karen faced the reality that her carefully crafted life of wealth and influence had crumbled into isolation, shame, and a prison sentence looming on the horizon. Jason, once a fleeting figure in Dallas's social scene, became a cautionary tale of ambition twisted by greed. The story of Robert Whitmore's death ended not with reconciliation or forgiveness but with a stark reminder that betrayal carries consequences. What had begun as whispers of infidelity and private suspicions culminated in a public tragedy, exposing the darkness hidden behind manicured lawns and glittering parties. For the Dallas community, the Whitmore case became a symbol of how quickly privilege could unravel. For investigators like Detective Ellison, it stood as confirmation that even in the most polished settings, truth finds a way to surface. And for Jessica, it was a painful legacy she would carry for the rest of her life. The shimmering pool, once the centerpiece of summer gatherings, remained empty and silent, its waters drained after the investigation. What had been a place of laughter and celebration was now remembered only as the scene of betrayal and death. The estate itself would eventually be sold, but the story lingered, passed along in hushed tones at country clubs and charity galas. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with success and elegance, was forever tied to scandal and tragedy. And the case closed with a finality that left no room for redemption, only the cold certainty that greed, betrayal, and silence had destroyed everything. Memo iti usuda lebih dari 400 kata untuk bagian ending.